Hey, folks, guess what? I get to talk to an old friend about everything, pretty much everything. We're going to talk about ancient literature. We're going to talk about current events. My friend is Louis Markos, yes, a fellow Greek. He teaches at Houston Baptist University, which I believe is located in Houston, Texas. And here he is, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Eric. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a Greek. We talk the same language.
I know. Now, listen, people who are watching on video, because a lot of people are going to watch this on YouTube, they're going to want to know why a professor of classics and literature at Houston Baptist, why you are wearing what looks like, you look like you're going to a prom. What is going on with that?
It's because of all the laptops and all the homes and all the world, you got to call mine. So I thought I'd look like Rick Blaine here.
Like you look like Rick's place. Okay. Listen, you're always fun, and it's why I was so excited to talk to you. What is your official title at Houston Baptist? What are you, professor of what?
Yeah, I'm a professor of English and scholar in residence, and I've got one of those chairs, the Robert H. Ray Chair in Humanities. And believe it or not, Eric, I just
know you have it?
29 years.
What's that?
29 years I just finished teaching at Houston Baptist.
Holy guacamole. Honestly, that's staggering. 29.
That's because I started teaching when I was 17. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, yeah. You've written a lot of books, Louis, and I want to talk to you about your new one. The new one is called Ancient Voices, an Insider's Look at Classical Greece. Now, of course, that gets me excited because I'm interested in classical Greece because I'm Greek. You're also Greek, but you love literature. I met you at a C.S. Lewis conference a number of years ago. I think it was 2005. And we bumped into each other not that often, but every time I see you, I get a smile on my face because you're the kind of professor, kind of teacher that I think everybody wishes they had. Somebody who's really excited about ideas and communicates them with passion. So I want to talk to you about current events as well and what's going on with the sort of, people attacking Western civilization and Western thought. But first, let's talk about this new book. It's called, again, Ancient Voices, an Insider's Look at Classical Greece. What do you mean an insider's look?
What I want to do in this book, Eric, is, C.S. Lewis said, if you want to understand the medieval knight, you don't study him as an object. You put on his helmet and look at the world through his visor. And what I wanted to do is really listen, pay attention to the actual voices of the Greeks that lived in the classical world, to see the world through their eyes. And Eric, I'm trying to do something the same and different than a lot of modern people. More and more, we've got these people that are going there and trying to listen to the voice of the women and the slaves and look at the graffiti and all. And I do respect any historian that does legwork. But Eric, too often, as you know, when people do that, it's really a cover for Marxist identity politics. It's like, I don't really want to understand the ancient world. I want to set it against each other. Black Lives Matter, which is what that is, Marxist identity politics. So I wanted to borrow something from them because a lot of times they have good techniques, and that is the technique of pay attention to the voices that we don't often hear. But I want to really hear them, Eric, okay? And so in this book, rather than focus on Homer and the great Greek tragedians and Plato and Aristotle, I try to listen to the other voices, Hesiod and Herodotus and Thucydides and Pericles and Socrates and Theocritus, some of the other voices that have always been before us, but we don't listen carefully enough to see the world through their eyes. And so that's what I mean by an insider's look. Let's get inside of their head and see the world the way they did, and then maybe we can learn something for ourselves. And one more thing, when I listen to these voices, I listen, number one, with the intent to learn from them rather than feel superior to them. And number two, God forbid, Eric, with a sense of gratitude for our ancestors, which has been very much lost in our modern world.
Well, that's a fact. I mean, that gets us you've already brought up the cultural Marxists, how they have taken over the humanities and academia And it is tragic because we've lost this patrimony, the treasures of the West, of classical Greece and Rome and of Western civilization. That's really not being taught. Even when it's being taught, it's not being taught because of what you just said, because people, they want to teach, they do an overlay of cultural Marxist ideology, of identity politics over it. And so you really can't learn about this stuff in most colleges around the country. And that's overwhelmingly true. Obviously, at Houston Baptist, it's not the case because you're kind of teaching this stuff straight.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to appropriate the past. I'm trying to learn from the past. In the Screwtape Letters, that's that great C.S. Lewis book where a senior devil teaches a junior devil how to tempt people. And what he says is, you know, if those humans really studied the Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman classics, if they really studied and learned, they would see through most of our temptations with ease. But don't worry. That doesn't happen in the modern Western world we created. There's only one group of people that really read the classics, and those are the last people in the world who can benefit from them. And what he means, Eric, and this is so important, and this is what sets my classes in Houston Baptist University and other great places like Hillsdale, Grove City, this is what sets them apart from the rest of universities. I went to the University of Michigan, excellent school. I went to Colgate, excellent school. But when we studied, say, Dante, we asked all sorts of questions. When did he write it? Why did he write it? What were the influences? Who did he influence? All sorts of great questions. But there was one question we never asked. Is what Dante wrote true? They never asked that question. It would be considered unutterably naive. But if we don't ask, is what Herodotus and Thucydides wrote, is it true? If we don't ask that question, it will never change our beliefs and it will never change our behavior. We will continue to hold the past at arm's length, appropriating it, feeling superior to it, which is what happens to a lot of kids when they go to seminary. They end up feeling superior to the Bible rather than being convicted by it. So it's not all as black as it looks, Eric. There are still good schools out there that are trying to do it, but they're few and they're fighting.
It's funny, Lou, because you bring something up. When I went to college naively, you know, not really knowing anything, but I knew that I wanted to study literature. And I instinctively did what you're describing. In other words, I would read Thomas Mann or whoever else, and I was trying to figure out the meaning of life based on their insights. And you know, in other words, I was taking them seriously. I was taking these ideas seriously and kind of building a worldview and trying to understand the meaning of life, or whether there is such a thing as a meaning of life. Is life meaningless? And I was, just because nobody told me not to, that's how I approached it. But when I guess you and I know that that's harder and harder to do, that if you go to a university, they're not going to say, when they read Dante, is there a hell? Is there a heaven? Is there they're just going to read it like, you know, it's a piece of literature which has no bearing on anything, and that we sort of like look at it like it's in a test tube or something like that. We don't really do that. So we're going to go to a break. Lou, if people want to find you, how do they go? Before we go to the break, how can people find you online?
The best way is to go to Amazon.com, type my name in, go to my Amazon author page, or go to YouTube and take Louis Markos, M-A-R-K-O-S, Greek, right? And you'll see my YouTube channel. And that's probably the best way to see my book.
I just want to make sure because, so Louis Markos with a K, M-A-R-K-O-S. We'll be right back with Louis Markos. Don't go away. Folks, welcome back. I'm talking to my friend, Dr. Louis Markos. He teaches English literature at Houston Baptist University. Louis, you're the kind of professor everybody wishes they had. The more I got to know you, the more I thought, boy, no wonder they're keeping you there at Houston Baptist, because it's just so hard to get people who love ideas and love literature and live it out. And that's kind of what you're talking about here. Now, you've written a lot of books. You and I met over C.S. Lewis, and I think I want to touch on this because you're a Christian. and you love the classics. There are people who don't understand that. C.S. Lewis understood it more profoundly than anyone, but how the classics can feed our Christian faith rather than somehow detract from it. Talk about that for a moment, if you could, for people who don't get that.
One of the books I wrote was called From Achilles to Christ, Why Christians Should Read the Pagan Classics. And Eric, I probably spend half my time these days speaking for classical Christian schools. These are schools that want to bring together our Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman cultures and bring them together. We want to bring Athens and Jerusalem together.
Yes.
And we believe that that's not only okay, but that it's a good thing, that Christians can learn from the higher pagans like Homer and Virgil, Plato and Aristotle, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Cicero, that there is real wisdom there. Now, that wisdom comes from what theologians call general revelation. They didn't have direct revelation from God as the Jews did, but that doesn't mean they were cut off from God. We are made in God's image, and he does speak to us more generically through creation, through our conscience, through our reason, and also, Eric, through our imagination. I've got a new book coming out in the fall called The Myth Made Fact, Reading Greek and Roman Mythology Through Christian Eyes. And I've got another one from University Press called From Plato to Christ, How Platonic Thought Shaped the Christians, right? So I do believe that we can learn from these people as the early church fathers did, as St. Paul himself did, who had a fully Greek education, a Roman citizenship, but a Jewish ethnicity and an allegiance to the Jewish law. Paul was the new man that brought all of these things together. And we can learn. I mean, we need a touchstone, a measure. We have the Bible as our, and the creeds as our measure, but there is real wisdom. We have to stop dropping a wall down and being afraid of anything that's not purely Christian.
That's really an unfortunate thing. And of course, you do find that among evangelicals who are more on the conservative side, that they can somehow be afraid of anything that's not explicitly Christian. And that's bad theology, obviously, because God says that anything that is good, that's me. I'm in it, you know, and you can find me in what we call pagan literature. I mean, anything that's true, all truth is of God. And I think that C.S. Lewis really, his whole life was about that. Let's face it. I mean, you really, it's an extraordinary thing. Just reading the Narnia Chronicles, you get an education in how to pull the two together. When we talk about your books, I mean, the book you wrote, From Achilles to Christ, Why Christians Should Read the Classics, give us an example. I mean, if somebody says, like, I don't understand, why should I read Homer, for example? What's the point?
One of the things, first of all, the Iliad is about a lot of things, but what it's really about is what it means to be mortal. Achilles is wrestling with his own mortality. He was supposed to be the son of Zeus, but he ended up being the son of a mortal named Peleus, and so now he will die. And he rages against his own immortality, and he doesn't really have an answer. We don't get all the answers in the pagan classics, but we get some pretty darn good questions, right? And we need to ask the right questions before we will seek the right answers. And Odysseus is a sort of messianic figure who's coming home to set all things to right. Now, you could argue he goes overboard, but he's not a Christian hero. But he is a glimmer or an intimation of what is needed. Many of your listeners probably read Antigone when they were in school, where there is this fight between the state and the family, between what is politically expedient and what is pious and correct. And Antigone goes to her death because she insists on giving proper burial to her brother, even though he was a rebel and was not supposed to get it. And we can understand this struggle, and we still need to hear it. See, the ancient Greeks, one of the things, Eric, we need tragedy, and I'll tell you why. When Greeks went to an ancient tragic thing, it was only once a year during the Dionysian festival, they were watching something that combined the theological, the philosophical, the civic, the ethical. We don't have that in our country. We separate the two, and therefore we can't have a real forum unless we're allowed to bring all the parts. We separate, we compartmentalize, and we say, that's religion, it belongs over here, and over here we can only talk about reason, as if reason and religion are somehow enemies.
Well, I mean, you're right. And this is, again, why I love you, because you get this. I see this even there are Christians that they wouldn't just say, oh, I'm not going to read anything unless it's explicitly Christian. They don't seem to want to do anything unless it's explicitly Christian, yes. like voting or being politically involved. They act as though they're totally indifferent to the state, that they just want to, suffer for their faith and die. They don't really care about being salt and light in their communities, making things better for other people. And it reminded me, recently I was reading about Paul in Acts, how he uses his citizenship, his Roman citizenship. He says, hey, wait a minute, you can't treat me like this. I'm a Roman citizen. And I think to myself, if Paul can do that, it seems obvious that we should think in terms of what is right and wrong, what is justice, how things work in terms of the government and the rules and the laws. Paul didn't shrink from that. He didn't say, no, I just want to suffer for Christ, and I wouldn't want to bring up the fact I'm a Roman citizen. I just won't mention it. He mentions it. He forces them in a way to deal with him on those terms. I never really noticed before, because I think that, again, there are a lot of Christians today, they would say, well, I would never bring up the fact that I'm an American citizen. That would be, I'm a citizen of heaven. And I think, well, wait a minute. So you're better than Paul? I mean, that's just, to me, the latest example of how people divide things and they get their theology screwed up.
We have to realize, C.S. Lewis had this wonderful line. He said, it's interesting that those Christians whose eyes were most focused on heaven were the ones that changed the world for the best. They were the early Christians that got rid of the gladiatorial games, that got rid of infanticide, that built the hospitals and the orphanages and made the world a better place. But it's the ones that were actually heavenly minded, but they also changed the world. They were, as you said, salt and light in the world. They didn't remove themselves from the world. They transformed the world. And we can see, one of the things that's so insidious about Black Lives Matter is that organization is Marxist identity politics. That's what it is. But the way that they're getting our young people, I'm including my students at a conservative school, the way they're recruiting our Christian students is by appealing to them about courage and the essential worth of every human being. But those ideas are Christian or Judeo-Christian ideas that are radically opposed to the Marxist identity politics. They can't get them excited about Marxism. What they do is they play on their good desire for justice and courage and mercy, and they twist it to use it for a program that is opposed to those very things. That's why we have got to see what we need to do, Eric. Rather than always attack their phony virtues, we've got to make the real virtues so compelling that they will want to put them into action in the right and proper way. But we're not telling a good enough story. They're stealing the narrative from us. They're twisting it, but they're stealing it. We need to offer something. Eric, if you want to get rid of weeds in your garden, the best way to do it is not to pour weed killer. The best way is to have very, very, very healthy grass. If you have very healthy grass, the weeds won't grow. If we can provide an understanding, a true understanding of mercy and yet patriotism that is true, then I think they'll be able to see through the lies. But we're not telling a good enough story, and the Greeks can help us tell that story, and the Romans too.
I just love the fact that you bring it back to right where we are today. I've said it many times on this program, and it needs to be said over and over and over again. Black Lives Matter doesn't care about black lives. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist cult that wants to destroy everything. It is fundamentally antithetical to the values of Martin Luther King Jr. And to most blacks in America today, and they are hijacking something very important. They're lying, they're misrepresenting themselves, they're doing evil under the guise of doing good. We'll talk more about that. I'm talking to Louis Markos, don't go away, of Houston Baptist University. He's currently appearing in a local production of Casablanca as Rick. You're familiar with the role of Rick. Humphrey Bogart plays him in the film. My friend Lou Marcos. We're talking about cultural Marxism and how, like every ideology, that it's a false ideology, it nonetheless needs to cannibalize or rather just simply steal from truth, right? So they pretend to appeal to things that we all care about, but then when you look at their website or whatever, they are fundamentally against everything most people would believe in. You know, if they understood what they're saying, most people would be against what they're talking about, wanting to rip apart the nuclear family, on and on and on and on.
Oh, but Eric, let me give you a good C.S. Lewis analogy. The magician's nephew. There is an evil magician named Uncle Andrew, and he is a cross between a mad scientist and a Nietzschean Superman or Ubermensch, right? He believes he is above middle-class morality, that he can do whatever he wants to gain the forbidden knowledge that he wants. But he's too cowardly to go looking for that forbidden knowledge. So he tricks this girl into picking up a ring, and she gets taken away to another world. And then he manipulates his own nephew, Diggory, to go after the girl to save her, only because he wants that forbidden knowledge. Now, Diggory doesn't want to do it, and Uncle Andrew says, I hope no nephew of mine will wear the white feather. Now, white feather is an old-fashioned way of saying, I hope my nephew's not going to be a coward. Now, I want you to notice what's happening here, Eric. Uncle Andrew, the magician, is advocating a breaking of all Judeo-Christian morality. But the only way he can get Diggory to follow him is to appeal to a Judeo-Christian understanding of courage. This is what you just said. They have to borrow, if not steal, if take from what we have to use it against us. They can't, they don't, what they're teaching doesn't have any goodness or truth or beauty in it. And so they have to borrow or steal from the real virtues in order to delude people into taking on their...
It's manipulative. And what you just said, I heard recently my friend Larry Taunton, who's in Birmingham, Alabama at Fixed Point Foundation, he gave a talk, and I just posted yesterday online the essay version, but he says precisely what you just said about Black Lives Matter, that they manipulate by appealing to, they say, oh, so you're a Christian, huh? Well, what about this or what about this? They only do it because they want to wipe out Christian faith and Judeo-Christian morality, but they're willing to use it if they can manipulate people. So it's you know what it is? It's deeply, deeply cynical. It's extremely cynical, but it's
the same way they use free speech. They yell about free speech, but as soon as they get control, there will be no more free speech. In other words, we're using free speech to cease. This is why I get upset about all the focus on Stalin. Let me explain a bit. I think that the reason so many communists are willing to attack Stalin is as a way to exonerate Lenin. Lenin was far more, Stalin was probably insane. Lenin was coldly and logically sane and one of the most evil individuals after Marx in human history. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was manipulating, he was using, he was destroying. There was a vote in which the Mensheviks outvoted the Bolsheviks, so Lenin stepped in and threw out the vote. And by the way, the word Bolshevik means majority. They were not the majority, but he manipulated language to say they were the majority. He used every horrible trick in the book to destroy the old system and build a new one. And, we're not, old Russia, but we're not completely safe. We have to open our eyes and realize what's going on and fight. Eric, before the break, you mentioned how Black Lives Matter goes completely against Martin Luther King. Here is a little bit of homework for your listeners. Go online and find Letter from the Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King. One of the best essays in American history. It basically proves that we need to have integration. But how does he prove it? By quoting the entire Judeo-Christian Greco-Roman legacy. He cannot find a reason to have integration in Marxism. And so read that essay and understand how just same way our founding fathers read the tradition and built this great country.
Letter from the Birmingham jail. Yeah, that would be great homework. Thank you, Professor. Let me ask you before we go to the break, we've just got a minute or so, but when you say that Lenin was evil, you said Marx was evil. Tell us about Marx, because I realized recently I really don't understand Marx. I get the idea that he was trying to do good, he cared about the suffering poor, and he got it wrong, and then his ideas were basically hijacked by Lenin. Am I wrong in that?
I mean, there's very little. I think there's a lot to be learned from Nietzsche and slightly from Freud. But Marx, other than his idea that you shouldn't separate the worker from the product of his labor, I think most of what Marx gave us has been incredibly bad. If there wasn't Marx, there wouldn't be Lenin. If there wasn't Marx, there wouldn't be Hitler either. Okay, we need to understand the root of this. And if I want to highlight one thing about Marx that is pure evil, it is the idea that we as human beings are mere mechanical products of our socio-economical political milieu. We cannot rise above the influence. And so he's a complete materialist, so that not only are our structures a result of dark economic forces, our very consciousness is a product of natural physical material processes. He was a naturalist.
I want to come right back to this. We're going to go to a break, and we'll pick up right there, folks. Don't go away. Houston Baptist University, you can find him on YouTube and other places, Marcos with a K. Lou, you were just talking about Marx as being someone who had a worldview, obviously, based on the idea that human beings are not transcendent. We're not walking poems. I don't know who said that. I always think it was Chesterton or somebody, but this idea that we're not that we're just, smart beasts, that we are nothing, we don't have souls, and we're just here for a season, and we want to make life better for that time. But you're saying that idea was deeply destructive. So talk about that, because I'm unaware of Marx's life, really.
Let's start talking by literature, what we both love, okay? The reason we go and study the classics is because we believe something about Homer and Virgil and Dante and Milton and Shakespeare. We believe that, as somebody said, Shakespeare is not of an age, but for all time. We believe that the great geniuses, literature, history, philosophy, aesthetics, that those great geniuses were able to rise above their moment to touch on goodness, truth, and beauty that transcended their time and milieu. Not for a Marxist, not for what are called new historicists. No, Shakespeare is a product of Elizabethan power politics that he cannot rise above. Now, of course, the modern, postmodern critic believes that he can rise above his own milieu to stand in judgment on Shakespeare and Milton and Chaucer and everybody else. But what it's done is it has completely cut us off from the past. We cannot learn from it. We can only use it. So just like a truly evil preacher uses the Bible to further his own agenda, the Marxist critic uses history to put forward their agenda of, again, identity politics, setting people against each other, setting classes and genders. And now, I mean, if you read Black Lives Matter, they spend as much time talking about gay and transgender people as they do about black people. It's a very, very strange document. It's very short if you want to go read it. And again, they do the same thing. When Hillary Clinton said, it takes a village to raise a child, she was saying something that was coming from African Christians, that the community needs to work together to raise children. That is a true Judeo-Christian understanding. But that's not what she meant. What she meant is, it takes the government to raise a child. So we've got to watch out the words we use, and we have to stop domesticating the past. The ancient Greeks are like Aslan. They're not a tame lion. We need to listen and learn. And Marx has given us a way of rising above the past and trying to control it.
Well, this is so fascinating. I don't want to forget to plug your book, because that's where we started. The book is called Ancient Voices, an insider's look at classical Greece. And as you said at the beginning of the program, we want to learn from the past. We don't want to merely use it to push forward our parochial agenda. But that is what Marxism is. That's what cultural Marxism is. I want to touch on this idea that Marxism, whether it's Marxism of Marx, the economic Marxism that obviously failed historically, or the cultural Marxism, but it's about dividing. In other words, it's about dividing the workers from those who have power over them and having a class war. But cultural Marxism says, well, if that's not going to work, or if that didn't work, we will divide people differently. We'll divide them by color, we'll divide them by gender, but it's the same kind of thing. It's identity politics is an outgrowth of that idea.
It is, and they laid out their whole just like Hitler did in Mein Kampf, but nobody read Mein Kampf. They've laid out their whole program. They know what they're doing, but we just want to blind ourselves, right? We need to learn. Let's talk about what we can learn. We're talking about current events, so let's look at the great figures in Athenian democracy, Solon and Pericles and Socrates. Maybe let's look at them. Solon is the father of democracy in Greece, by which we mean democracy in the world, right? And what was happening in Greece about Athens specifically, about 600 BC, is that there were bad crops, and what was happening is all the small farmers were being bought out and eventually almost had to sell themselves into slavery. And what was happening is rich and poor was getting worse and worse. It looked like there was going to be a revolution, and the Athenians did something amazing. They took Solon and gave him the full reins of power to remake the Constitution. Now, Solon is one of the most important people in history because he could have become another Lenin or Stalin or Castro or Pol Pot or Mao Zedong. He could have misused his power. But he grew up reading, the Iliad, or at least listening to the Iliad and the Odyssey. He was Greek. He knew how to bring together the practical and the idealistic. And he knew that if he was going to save democracy in Athens, he would need to find that Aristotelian golden mean, not going too far, right? Not giving everything to the rich, but not giving everything to the poor. And so the first thing he did is canceled all the debts so that they would get out of slavery, but he did not redistribute wealth. It's like we call it the American Revolution, Eric, but it wasn't a revolution. It was a colonial secession. We did not completely throw out society and start all over again as the French Revolution did. Right? This was not radical. It was let's fix things without disturbing what works, right? And so, interestingly enough, he fixed things up, but he still kept more power in the hand of the landowners, not because he was an elitist in the negative sense, but we'll go to.
Let's hit pause there.
Okay.
We're going to be right back, folks. I'm talking to Louis Markos of Houston Baptist University. Do not go away. Hey there, folks. This is technically hour 2, but I'm still talking to our friend, Dr. Louis Markos of Houston Baptist University. You were just saying, Lou, about how Solon in classical Greece had the wisdom, and it's an extraordinary thing that 25 centuries ago, he had the wisdom to govern in a way that we still marvel at today. We're still trying to get this right today. Tell us more about that.
It's amazing. Basically, what Solon did is he declared what the Old Testament calls a jubilee. He released the debts, but he did not redistribute wealth. He wasn't a Marxist, right? He tried to bring true justice, but preserve a balance. And people might think he's an elitist because he kept most of the political power in the hands of landowners, but that's because the people that own land have much more at stake in a government being stable. And so he just understood human nature. And Eric, let me tell you what he did. Okay, I'm going to tell you the reason why Rome was great and why America used to be great. And it's the same thing that Solon did. What Solon did is he actually increased immigration, but he wanted skilled workers from other parts of Greece to come to Athens. And at the same time he opened up immigration, he increased Athenian pride. In the same way that the Romans took their enemies and made them into Roman citizens, and in the same way America used to take immigrants and make them into Americans, this is what Greece did at the best. When Greece became ethnocentric and everybody was a xeni, a foreigner, and they didn't want to listen to them, they fell apart. And we need to go back. See, Eric, you and I are both Greek, right? When we grew up, we were Americans, right? The old question, if there's a war between Greece and America, we're on the side of America. We're Americans. But in our homes, we celebrated our Greek culture. We had festivals. We invited people in. But we were Americans, and that's what we had together. The Greeks did that at their best. The Romans did it at their best. And when they ceased to do that, when they could no longer absorb and assimilate the German barbarians as they used to, they fell apart. And that is what we're losing. We have lost a sense of our own identity and pride, and we don't believe in ourselves. So why should the immigrants believe in ourselves?
You know what? That is exactly. I can't remember if I ever sent you a copy of my book, If You Can Keep It, but that's basically the thesis. It's this idea that we have to love our country and celebrate what's good in it, or it goes away. And then we lose cultural confidence. And of course, that's precisely where we are today. And it's where Europe is today. My goodness, talk about losing cultural confidence. Angela Merkel and others, they don't really have anything to assert. They're sort of just there, and they're allowing those from the outside to come in and to dictate. I mean, we see this all over Europe. You see it in England, you see it in France, that they've allowed a Muslim ideology to come in a sense, to dictate to them, rather than say to them, hey, if you want to come in here, you have to adopt our attitudes. But they no longer have attitudes. They no longer know what they believe. And that's why, again, I talk about this all the time, Lou, but how vital it is for Americans to know what is America, what is American-style self-government, to celebrate it, to know the poems and the songs of our history, to celebrate Paul Revere's Ride and Longfellow's poem, and on and on and on. Because if you do not know who you are, you cannot possibly share the glories of our democracy and freedom with the rest of the world. And of course, that's what it would be to make America great again, would be to restore that kind of patriotism. It's not ugly nationalism.
No, it's not. The immigrants come here because they want to be part of the American experiment. And they come to LA and they say, no, we hate ourselves, right? The Europeans can't fight radical Islam because they are a moral and spiritual vacuum. And as Aristotle used to say, nature hates a vacuum. It will end up being filled by something else. It's amazing. We invite people here and then we tell them, no, we're a bad country, hate us. It's crazy. That whole self-loathing thing actually is true. You see it in academia. It's close to a disease. Amazing.
Well, it really is. I mean, the whole idea that if I'm white, I should just shut up and hide in the corner. You think, what madness? What are we talking about? If anybody has a sense of history and a sense of the history of ideas, you know that's not going to end well. But it's where a lot of the radical left in academia is today, and it's a joy to be talking to somebody in the academy who is not there, who gets this stuff.
It's amazing. I mean, one of the other things I reveal in Pericles' funeral oration is his version of the Gettysburg Address. He starts and he says, I'm not going to talk too much about the soldiers who died because some of you will be mad if I don't say enough good things about them, but many of you will be mad if I overpraise them. Pericles and the Greeks at their best understood that the greatest destroyer of democracy, the universal acid of democracy, is envy. Envy leads to resentment. That is what I am seeing in the streets of our great nation right now. It is a kind of envy that wants to tear everything down to a lowest common denominator world. And Pericles understood that, and he was able to hold it. But once he died, probably of the plague, all the demagogues rose up, the people that play in our prejudices and our anger, and Athens was torn apart, and they lost the Peloponnesian War. And we would have lost all of ancient Greece if it wasn't for Alexander the Great taking it and spreading throughout the world. God has a sense of humor, and we still have it. But again, here's the other problem. Real quick, Aristotle said this, that the kinds of behavior that democracy breeds are often issues of what democracy needs to survive. right? So democracy often breeds the very kind of envy and bitterness and resentment that will destroy it, right? And it's weird. The more everybody gets raised up, the more envy there is, right? Because peasants don't envy the king. Peasants envy the peasant next door who has 2 more cows and an extra acre of land. We're Greeks. We know about the Greek Civil War, which was worse. They killed more of themselves than Hitler did, and Hitler killed a lot of them. We have got to replace envy with gratitude. And I know that sounds old-fashioned. It's like write a thank you note. But we've lost a sense of gratitude for the legacy that's been passed down to us for this great nation that allows us to criticize it. These people couldn't be petitioning under Lenin or Stalin or Mao or Castro or Pol Pot or any of these people. They would be put to death immediately. And you know the great irony of history. The very professors that want Marxism will be the first people to be killed if Marxism ever takes over the country. Amazing.
It is amazing. It's just so much fun to talk to you. We've just got a couple of minutes left today, but trust me, Lou, we got to have you back. There's so much more to talk about, but you bring so much to the conversation because, you know, a lot of times when we're talking current events, it's only about current events. You're able to bring an historical perspective, and it's a beautiful thing. What you just said about envy, there is no question that is at the heart of Marxist ideology, and certainly the cultural Marxism we're seeing today. It is about the deification of envy. And I remember when I was an undergraduate, before I really found my way and God found me, I bought into that idea. So I remember those feelings, that idea of righteous anger against, you know, those who would oppress me or anything. And it's intoxicating and it's horrifying, and it leads to the bloodbath of the French Revolution. So it's important we identify it. It is envy. You're quite right, and it's disguised as anything but envy. I'm sorry we're out of time today, Lou, but I want to say that it's just great to reconnect with you. I know that people can find you fairly easily if they can only spell Marcos with a K.
That's
Louis
right,
Marcos, right. Baptist University. I know you're on YouTube. Where else can people find you? Is there a website?
My website is being reconstructed these days so often, so it's just best to go on YouTube or go on my Amazon page, and you can just email me. I'll answer you, just like C.S. Lewis.
I'm sorry we're out of time, but we will have you back as soon as possible. Continue the conversation. God bless you, my friend.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Keep up the fight.
Quick question. Do you share the values of the people who sell you things?
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell.
I can tell you that I do. I love Mike Lindell, not just Mike Lindell, but what he stands for.
And I encourage you to use this time at home to get back in the Word, read our Bibles, and spend time with our families.
The dude said that at the White House. How can you not love him?
What difference at this point does it make?
No, actually, it does make a difference. How you spend your money is as important as how you vote. And you don't want to, help elect some crazy guy, do you?
You may cut me, man, but I'm going to wrap this chain around your head.
Did he just say that?
If you fell off sideways, you landed on the darn cement.
So, if you want your money to support good things, visit mypillow.com.
Corn Pop was a bad dude.
And please use the discount code Eric or Metaxas.
If you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap.
A bathing cap? Anyway, please go to mypillow.com and use the code Eric or Metaxas.
Corn Pop was a bad dude.